Talk Radio.
Mi chiamo Afuraitkaitnit, neye ojira da, medinde ojirafo, kwesi ranehem pata akan. Akwamumain amaruka etipi mu ojirafo, ojirabain mu. That means greetings to all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, meaning Africans, Black people. Today is Ojira Day, Purification Day. My name is Ojirafo Kwesi Ranehem Pata Akan. Ojirafo of the Akwamu Nation in North America, within Ojira Mind, the purified nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere. Yet I say we thank you for tuning in to the broadcast once again. We are opening up the chat room right now. If you have any questions or comments and you'd like to interact in the chat room, you must log in as a user in order to interact in the chat room. If you do not have a username, you can sign up for one very quickly in Blog Talk, and then you can interact. For those who are on the phone line, if you have a question or a comment on the phone line, you must hit the number 1 so that we can see that your hand is raised, and then we can connect with you, bring you in. Okay, so we just rebooted the chat room real quick, and it's coming up right now. And once it comes up, we can place a couple of links in the chat room. And it's just pulling up. So for those who are new to the broadcast, we have free broadcasts on a weekly basis. On Joda, which is Monday night, we have Akanfo Nanasom, Ancient Authentic Akan Ancestral Religion. And we deal specifically on Monday nights with the Akan expression of ancestral religion. Number 1, because we are Akan. Number 2, because there's a great deal of misinformation being propagated regarding Akan religion, Akan culture, philosophy, cosmology, the nature and function of the divinities, the nature and function of the ancestors and ancestors, the nature and function of the Great Mother and the Great Father, the Supreme Being, the nature and function of the Creator and Creatress, who are grandchildren of the Supreme Being. So, we deal with Akanto Nanasom from an ancient, authentic Akan perspective. We're dealing with the ancestral tradition, ancestrally inherited ancestral religion. So we migrated from ancient Kamit, a title of Nubia, migrated to the western part of the continent after the fall of Kamit. A couple of thousand years ago, reestablished the Kamit or Ghana Empire in the western part of the continent. 1,000 years after that, approximately, because of Muslim invasion, corruption, our people migrated away from that region further south towards what is today's and into what is today's Cote d'Ivoire and Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, and the Republic of Ghana. And then a few hundred years after that, some of our people were forced into the Western Hemisphere during the Musu or Kessier, the Great Perversity, the enslavement era. And this is how Akan people came from ancient Kamit to West Afuraitkai to the Western Hemisphere. So we carry our ancestral religious practice with us wherever we migrated. So we've proven that in our various publications. For example, the Hoodoo people, Afuraitkaitnit, Africans in North America, Akan, custodians of Hoodoo from ancient Hoodoo, Ndunu land, Kanit, Nubia. We've proved that the term Hoodoo is from the Akan term Ndu, which means medicine from plants, stumps, trees, and so forth, root medicine, root work. The Ndu, Yefo, and the Udumafo are the folks or the people folk who are Uduma, the ones who give medicine. These are the Hoodoo man and Hoodoo women. We still use that same terminology. It also means to call down the spirit, become heavy with the spirit, conjure, and so forth. So Hoodoo and conjure being the definitions of our ancestral religious practice in North America, we continue to use these same titles from our language. Of course, we show how Hoodoo is also traced back to ancient Kamit and Kamit, Nubian Kamit, being the name associated with root medicine, work, and so forth, also to conjure, but also the name of the land itself, also the name of the people, the Undu land, Undu people. Of course, we just published our article, Kanche, the Akan origin of the term conjure as Hoodoo. We did a broadcast on that last night, proving that the term Kanche is used in the Akan tradition, speaking specifically about calling down, invoking an abosom, a deity, evoking an ancestral spirit ritually through ritual prayer, chants, incantations, and so forth. Kan or Kan means to speak. Che means talking about the coming forth of a deity, a spirit, through ritual incantation, ritual prayer, ritual speech, and so forth, ritual utterances. So that Kanche, the term we've been using for thousands of years, and we show that in the Akan language, and also those exact same terms with the exact same meaning in the Medutu, in the hieroglyphs, in the language of ancient Kamit. So Kanche, the term we use talking about calling down the spirit, is where the term associated with our tradition, conjure, comes from. When the white canal spring heard us utilizing the terms undu and kanche, and hoodoo and kanche, they said, well, those people are saying hoodoo and kanje or conjure. We continue to use the same terms today in North America, in the United States, hoodoo and kanche or conjure, so mispronounced conjure, hoodoo and kanche that we've been using for thousands of years, referencing our ritual practice. So this is what we get into on Monday night. On ODWIRA, on Tuesday night, we have purification. ODWIRA means purification. In the Akan language, it also means a celebration of purification. For example, our New Year celebration, which takes place around the Autumn equinox, a 7-day New Year celebration, is called ODWIRA. In ancient Kamit, the word Jira means purification. It also means a celebration of purification. Once again, the same word with the same definition in the ancient language, and of course, the contemporary expression of that ancient language, because we're the same people speaking the same language. We talk about purification and how purification operationalizes nanason. Purification operationalizes Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, ancestral religion. Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, or African ancestral religion, is the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. That means through ritual we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to incorporate in order to harmonize our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual, we reject those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to reject, to repulse, to hate, to repel, in order to restore balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions, and therefore realign ourselves with order. So the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance are the expansive and contractive poles of nanason, of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, African ancestral religion, no matter what form or expression it takes. The ancient expression of Kanat and Kamit, contemporary expressions of the Akan, Yoruba, Ewe, Fon, Igbo, Basa, Fula, Fang, Ibibio, Mindi, and so forth, Hoodoo, Juju, Voodoo, Grigri, Winti, Candomblé, Lukumi, no matter what form our ancestral religious practices take on the continent or in the Western Hemisphere. Fundamentally, they are all the same practice. They are founded upon the ritual incorporation of divine law, the ritual restoration of divine balance. We show how ancestral religion impacts every aspect of our lives, because we're always seeking to align our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order, or realign them with divine order every moment of every day. Every thought, every intention, and every action should be aligned or realigned with divine order every moment of every day. So this is a living culture, so it impacts every aspect of our lives. Purification, Jira, operationalizes nanason. Purification operationalizes our practice of ancestral religion. Purification operationalizes the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. So we read from texts from ancient Kamit, as well as orature, oral literature from the various expressions of our culture, and we talk about ritual practices, cosmology, culture, and all kinds of different things related to ancestral religion on ODWIRA, dealing with the purification of the process. As we've said in the past and continue to teach, yes, there's misinformation in the Western Hemisphere dealing with ancestral religion. There's a great deal of misinformation coming from those on the continent who have been infected with white culture, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, white culture in general. And because they have become infected and woven those infections within their presentation of the culture, while their presentation of the culture appears to be authentic and traditional, it has been infected, and therefore they pass on infected, corrupt, false values wrapped up in traditional jargon. And some of our people don't recognize the reality. And therefore they take on a corrupt culture and believe that they're practicing their culture. In reality, our ancestral culture is inherited through our spirit-genetic blood circle. We are born into the world with our ancestral religion and culture. So it's not given to us, it is inborn, and we simply need to discover that from our direct blood ancestresses and ancestors who were assigned to us by the Supreme Being before we even entered into the womb. We learned directly from the Abosa, the Orisha, the Vodou, the Ntorotu, who were assigned to us before we entered into the womb. So we are born into the world with Nanafsom ancestral religion. We are born into the world with Amamre ancestral culture. Of course, this deals with Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, and Afuraitkaitnit people only. The whites and their offspring are spirits of disorder. They do not have a Krawa soul, a divine consciousness. They are not us and we are not them, and that includes all white Americans, white Europeans, white Hindus, white Arabs, white Hispanics, white Latinos, white pseudo-Native Americans, white Asians. All non-black people are spirits of disorder by incarnation and reincarnation. This is how they come into the world. There's no exception to that reality. They're the enemies of our people and have always been that until we make them extinct. So we're going to get into that details tonight, dealing with the nature of their character and spiritual anatomy, which is perverse and corrupt and discordant. So this is what we deal with on ODWIRA. On Wednesday nights, we have Igboa Marketplace Day, and we have individuals who have started businesses, organizations, and institutions, our people serving our people in a positive capacity and maintaining our ancestral religious values in the process. When you go to our home economic development model page, you'll see the list of businesses, organizations, and institutions who have come onto the show with us to discuss their work, as well in the community, as well as how their ancestral religious values inform their service to the community. We have published the home economic development model, which is a model of economic development rooted in our ancestral religious values, and it is therefore a holistic approach to economic development rooted in a mindset nation building restoration. So we published that model. You can download it from the Okom Economic Development Model page, and we'll put that link in the chat room. You'll also see the 4-part series we did on the Okom Economic Development Model on Blog Talk. You can download that series, YouTube version of that, to listen to that. In addition to other videos dealing with economic warfare, as well as Nokwariko Ne Amamre, self-employment, and ancestral culture. In the Okom Economic Development Model, we have the strategy, which is to starve the beast and feed the pride. That means we make an assessment on a weekly basis to determine what funds we would have potentially wasted with the whites and their offspring, and we then starve the beast and feed the pride. We reallocate those funds away from the white business and redirect them to the business, organization, or institution of the week. We are targeting one business, organization, or institution per week for 52 weeks, and we began that process in February as a community. So when we starve the beast and feed the pride, we take the $20 we would have wasted at a white business and reallocate that to the business of the week. When 1,000 people engage that process and take the $20 away from Walmart or Starbucks or CVS or 7-Eleven and direct it to the business of the week, institution of the week, the organization of the week, then 1,000 people engage in that process results in a $20,000 infusion of capital into a black business in the course of 1 week. And therefore, they can expand their services to us. They can hire black people within the community to work in the business to serve us at a greater capacity. And therefore, we don't receive those services and products from the whites and their offspring. We shift that to our businesses, let the whites and their offspring go out of business, and we spend those billions with our people. We're targeting one business, organization, or institution per week for optimal capital infusion. So we have been engaged in this process, and you'll see that list, and that's an ever-growing list. So this is what we're doing. We have a couple of announcements. We will be in just outside of Atlanta in Decatur, Georgia, this Sunday, November 22nd. We have the information on page, and we're going to put the link in the chat room real quick. If you go to the Hoodoo page on our website, you can download the flyer for that and share that flyer. You can also see it on the event notification on Facebook, on our Facebook page that we've been sending out. That's the Hoodoo page on our website, ODWIRA.com. So you can download that flyer and share it. The topic that we will be addressing is Hoodoo, the Arcana ancestral religion in North America, born of the blood circles of our people in North America. So we'll go into detail about that. It's going to be based on our book, Hoodoo People, and we also have the book Hoodoo Mind, Hoodoo Nation Journal. We had our first annual Hoodoo Mind or Hoodoo Nation Festival here in Washington, D.C. on October 17th. It's a great festival, and we published a journal specifically for that festival's free book, gave out to everybody who came to the event for free. We do that whenever we have a presentation. We just had a presentation on Kokobo a couple of days ago here in Washington, D.C. We gave out a free copy of one of our books to everyone who attended the event, and everyone, of course, who attends, our people only, of course. We do not charge admissions fees for our presentation. So you come to a free event always, and we always give away a free copy of the book that we are presenting on. We have 17 books that we have published. All of the ebook versions of our 17 books are free downloads from our website, and then we also print the softcover versions of our books in-house on our own printers in color, and we sell those. They range between $8 and $11, and any order of 10 books or more is automatically 30% off. The first 5 books, there's a discount for the first 5. It's 20% off. That's the first 5 are $40. The first 10 books out of the 17-book set, if you order the first 10, is 30% off. That means it's $66 for 10 books, and then the same 30% off whether you order 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, or 17. Of course, you can order one book or more. They range between $8 and $11. The discounts are for the multiple orders. So when we went to Alabama a couple of weeks ago, we did our presentation on our book, Kukutuntun, the Ancestral Jurisdiction, talking about the cosmological foundation of creation, the nature of the Great Mother and Great Father, Supreme Being, the nature of the Creator and Creatress, Ra and Ra'ad, who are grandchildren of the Supreme Being, the nature of the deities, we have both of them, the nature of the ancestral spirits, the non-unknown Unsamafo and their relationship to us, and the origin of the fictional cartoon characters who never existed, including Jesus, Yeshua ben Pandera, Muhammad, Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Moses, Solomon, Sheba, Menelik, Brahman, Buddha, Allah, Yahweh, all of these fictional cartoon characters who never existed of any form whatsoever or of any race. We did that presentation in Montgomery, Alabama a couple of weeks ago. Great event. Good to connect with the people in Montgomery. We will be back in the area soon. We were able to give away a free copy of that Kukutuntun book to everyone who came out, just about everyone, because we ran out because more people came out. But we were able to get books to everybody because we had some other books there as well. So everywhere we go, when we go to Atlanta, we're going to give away a free copy. That's what we endeavor to do. We are only able to do that with the help of the community. So if you would like to support that effort, any purchase of our one or more of our books allows us to engage that process to give away free books to Afuraitkaitnit people. Some people are new to ancestral religious information. They come in contact with people who are charlatans or misinforming people, publishing information that's false or half accurate and half false. They get charged for thousands of dollars for initiations and readings and everything else. We don't engage that nonsense. We give away a free copy of the book. All the books are available for free online, whether you have funds or not. Our presentations are free admission always. We never charge for that. Our people need to be able to learn about their ancestral culture without any charge and without any coercion. So this is what we're dealing with. So you can go to our publications page, the Nhoma page on our website, if you like to support that effort, are trying to begin that process as soon as possible. As far as the printing, we print on demand, so once we receive orders and so forth, we can order more of the ink we need to print out the book so we can get them ready for this weekend before we leave to go to Atlanta. So if you would like to assist us, you can do that tonight. You can go directly. You can go now to the Nhoma page on our website, and that will greatly assist us in being able to get these books out. We've given away over 550 free books to the Afuraitkaitnit community in various states in the United States in the different presentations that we've done. All right. So let us get into the topic for tonight, Hadrian and the Roman, quote-unquote, deification of dissexuality, homosexuality, Osiris Antinous. What are we talking about? The Emperor Hadrian, one of the Roman perverse invaders of ancient Kamit. Of course, when the Assyrians invaded, and after them the Persians, and after the Persians invaded, the Greeks invaded, and after the Greeks were forced out by the Romans, and then the Romans took over for a while, and then after the Romans, then you had the Arabs take over for a number of centuries. But when the Romans were in charge, one of the emperors, the Emperor Hadrian, came into a position of rulership around the 2nd century AD. Of course, just one of the whites and their offspring, one of these perverse, that's their nature. Dissexuality, homosexuality is their nature. We call it dissexuality because it is more fitting as a term. Dis means not. So just like you have disorder, meaning order is not apparent, not manifest. Sexuality, that means sexuality is not occurring. Sexuality only occurs between a man and a woman. Afurakani man, Afuraitkaitnit woman. Anything else is dissexual. It's not same sex, it's dissexual. It's perverse, insane, out of harmony with divine order, without exception. So, our first presentation that we did a couple of days ago on Kokobo, and we're going to get into our book Kokobo tonight, talking about the divine prohibition against dissexuality, homosexuality, as we find it in the text of ancient Kamit. We prove in that book that dissexuality, homosexuality was never accepted, and of course still not accepted, but was never accepted in ancient Kamit. We prove that conclusively through the text that the whites and offspring seek to misinterpret and rewrite to try to include their perversity in these texts. We prove and show exactly how they are lying about that in detail by translating the text properly and showing those translations and proving that. So, but we did a presentation on that, but we also talked about the eradication of dissexuality, homosexuality through ancestral religion. Any obstacle that we face can be overcome through the agency of our own culture and religion. We do not need to look outside of our people, our culture, our ancestral religion for remedy to anything that ails our people, whether it's drug addiction, whether it's anything else. And this includes when people suffer from a great deal of trauma, child molestation, abuse, torture, rape, and so forth. The vast majority of our people who are engaged in the perversity of dissexuality have suffered some kind of trauma. And then, of course, this culture constantly trying to brainwash our people into this perverse behavior because they are perverse. It is in their nature as spirits of disorder to promote the most perverse practices, sexual deviance being at the top. So it's their ill nature to promote that. It's not within our nature to engage in that perversity because we are spirits of order with a krawa, a soul with divine consciousness, the divinity dwelling in the head region. The whites and their offspring do not have that. So, of course, they are not grounded in divine order. They are spirits of disorder by nature. So they're always going to promote that nonsense. Some of our people get caught up in that because they're following along the culture of the whites and their offspring. The vast majority is through trauma, rape, torture, and so forth, molestation, domestic abuse, all these various things. And then what comes behind that is the cultural conditioning to make people believe that because they have these experiences and they're suffering, that the perverse ideas that were planted in their heads by the criminal must be their own original ideas, and they just need to embrace who they are. That kind of insanity. So churches, schools, the media, magazines, music, all forms of media are constantly bombarding our people from the time our children are in school up until they're adults, constantly trying to convince them to try homosexuality. There's something wrong with you if you don't embrace that kind of idiocy. Of course, the whites and their offspring know it's perverse. That is why they promote it. They do not believe that it's natural and normal. All of them know it is not natural and it is perverse. That is precisely why they promote it. They are not under any confusion. They're not wondering or taking some position that this is a natural lifestyle and part of the human experience as they claim. All of them know that it is insane and perverse. And that is exactly why they promote it, because it is insane and perverse, and they seek to destabilize our people. Even when people have experiences where a deceased relative or non-relative, a discarnate spirit that they have become receptive to, that discarnate, disembodied spirit, constantly approaching the individual, attaching themselves to the individual, planting in their head and pushing them in an energetic fashion towards individuals of the same sex and pushing them away from people of the opposite sex. They do that ever since the person was a child. And the person will say, ever since I was a child, I've always felt pulled towards the same sex and pushed away from the opposite sex. And it is true, because that's what these perverse spirits were doing. Of course, when you eradicate these perverse spirits, those perverse desires disappear instantaneously and permanently, because they were never your desires in the first place. So, through ancestral religion, that is overcome. The neutralization of these perverse spirits, this dissexuality, homosexuality, which was imposed upon the minds of our people, can be cured, because it was never part of our nature in the first place. And that includes also when people utilize chemical and biological weapons of warfare, the whites and offspring, polluting our food, adding chemicals, foods and so forth into the soil to create these secondary dissexual characteristics within the bodies of the people, as well as animals and everything else. Any obstacle that's put forward, any manner in which they seek to promote this perversity, we have the capacity to overcome that. So we were talking about that a couple of days ago with our Kokobo movement. We're having a movement, and we'll be doing that presentation in different cities as well, giving away free copies of that book, The Divine Prohibition Against Dissexuality, Homosexuality, How It Was Never Accepted in Ancient Kamit, the various texts where we expose that. We'll be giving away a copy of that book, the softcover version, to everyone who comes out to those presentations. We want that in the hands of all of our people. The ebook version is already free, but we want that in the hands of all of our people. So we have a GoFundMe campaign for that, so that we can generate the funds to print out as many hundreds, thousands of those books and just give them away, so people can study the text of ancient Kamit, our direct blood ancestresses and ancestors writing, talking about how dissexuality is perverse, talking about divine order, the nature of the deities and the ancestral spirits and their relationship to us and so forth. Our people need that detailed information. But when the crackers come forward talking about homosexuality was part of African culture from ancient times, we know it's a lie instinctively. Then we have the direct proof exposing these criminals. So this is what we dealt with a couple of days ago, but now we want to go further and show, as we said in the advertisement for the show, when you talk about the Emperor Hadrian, one of the cracker rulers, one of the Roman individuals who were in control in the 2nd century AD, Hadrian took on one of his perverse and dissexual male counterpart. They had a perverse, dissexual, quote-unquote, relationship. The name of the other dissexual was Antinous. He met him as a young boy, like 12, 13 years old, and started engaging in that perverse, dissexual behavior from that time. A few years later, around the time that Antinous became around 20 plus years old, he died, and then Hadrian was so distraught he wanted to make this faggot deity. So he elevated him, quote unquote, and tried to deify him. So in ancient Kamit, you have a white faggot 20 plus year old who died, the white faggot emperor, the perverse beast emperor, now puts this perverse beast on a quote unquote pedestal, so to speak, begins to refer to him as Osiris Antinous, trying to identify him with that divinity, Ausar, corrupted into Osiris by the Greeks, and then institutes the worship of quote unquote Osiris Antinous all throughout ancient Kamit, as well as throughout the Roman Empire. So you have the tiny percentage of brainwashed Negro types, but primarily the whites and offspring who are in control of Kamit, worshiping a white faggot as a deity. And all throughout the Roman Empire, throughout the, Southern Europe and portions of Asia Minor and so forth, worshiping this faggot as a deity, praying to this faggot, giving offerings, asking for assistance with spiritual matters and so forth to a faggot. This is the institutionalization of the deification of dissexuality, homosexuality, trying to impose that upon our people. Now, of course, our people weren't accepting that. The native population of Afuraitkaitnit of ancient Kamit, we were not accepting of that. The whites and their offspring were in control, so they were pushing that. And they did as much as they possibly could to push it, but it didn't take on with our people. It was always part of their people's culture. So when people talk about, of course, in Greece and Rome and all their faggot deities, fake gods and goddesses and so forth, they've always promoted that amongst themselves. The difference here is we're talking about when they sought to impose that upon our people, upon our culture, after they invaded and took control over the northern part of Kamit and so forth, but trying to deify dissexuality, to make us worship that perversity in the form of a faggot who died, and now they try to make him a divinity. Now, you'll find the direct manifestation of that today. It's not just the whites and their offspring saying, well, dissexuality, homosexuality is just a lifestyle and it's something that's just acceptable as anything else and we should respect it. Of course, all of that is perverse and a lie. You do not respect dissexuality. You don't respect. It's not a lifestyle, as many would properly say. It's a death style. But you do not have any respect for that or anybody who's engaged in it. The whites and their offspring can engage in that all they want. They can die from it, and we would like for that to happen. They can become exterminated as soon as possible. That's no problem with that at all, but it has nothing to do with our people. We don't respect any of our people who are engaged in that perversity, that sexual deviance. They are perverse. So, but they're not just stopping there, saying, well, you need to respect it and have tolerance. They've moved forward trying to promote the false idea that if you're not engaged in that perversity, you can't reach a certain level of spiritual development. They're trying to teach people that that's a level of spirituality that's the highest level of spirituality. They've been teaching that since ancient Greece and Rome and prior to that. And some of our people are foolish enough to listen to that nonsense. You'll even have criminal type, lying type, agent type Negroes like Malidoma Some talking about faggots are gatekeepers in the Dagara culture. Of course, that's an absolute lie. He's a liar, he's a criminal, he's a fraud. And the Dagara elders do not respect him. The only people who participate in what he's talking about are faggots just like him. There's never been part of Dagara culture or any other Afuraitkaitnit culture. But you have Negroes like that running around being funded by white faggot organizations. And of course, some of our people will read some of that nonsense and assume it must be accurate. The reason they promote that perversity is because they want, number one, for our people who are returning to ancestral religions to turn away from it. If we see that in it, we're like, oh, well, no, we can't deal with that. I don't want to have anything to do with any African religion. They accept faggotry and lesbianism and so forth. The whites and their offspring seek to promote that in ancient Kamit and make it appear that it's part of the culture of ancient Kamit, and they're proxies within the community, the agents of the whites and their offspring in the community. Hebrews, Muslims, Moors, others will promote this idea that dissexuality was part of the culture of ancient Kamit, when all of them know that's not true. But they are agents of the whites and their offspring. All of those groups, the Moors, the Hebrews, the Muslims, and so forth, were founded by the whites and their offspring, and they used their black proxies to promote the culture, the perverse culture within our community. And they are still on the street corners and all over the internet serving their white masters as agents of the whites and their offspring. Doesn't matter how loud they try to pretend to talk against white people, they are agents of the whites and their offspring, all of them. So they promote that to try to get our people away from ancestral religion. They're always trying to get us away from our identity as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, trying to get us away from hoodoo and juju and voodoo and so forth, because they know that it was through hoodoo, juju, voodoo, grigri, and so forth that we brought an end to enslavement. We began to kill the whites and their offspring, massacre them, force them into abolition, force them into emancipation, force them into setting up programs for repatriation and so forth. If it wasn't for us being motivated by the Abosom and Nsamafo and began to massacre the whites and their offspring, men, women, and children, burning down plantations and so forth, waging war against them, as in the Gullah Wars against the United States Army for over 50 years without being drugged back into enslavement. If it wasn't for us engaging that process, we would be enslaved right now. But because our people engaged the whites and their offspring militarily, because we were in part of our ancestral religious practices, so they know that's what freed us. And they know when we return to that, we would complete that process and eradicate them completely. So they want to keep us away from that. This is why there are practices in the community, and they themselves are promoting this perverse. But they go forward and begin to promote the idea that homosexuality, dissexuality is a high level of spiritual development, when in fact it is no spiritual development anywhere near dissexuality. It is the manifestation of spirituality. It's the manifestation of the highest level of perversity imaginable for a living in this individual. So they start trying to deify. But that deification is not brand new. It's not just New Age pseudo-spirituality talking about the spiritual basis of homosexuality. It goes back to the Emperor Hadrian trying to force deification of dissexuality upon black people in ancient Kamit. And once that process was started, and that was an unusual move, because they typically didn't move in that fashion. They would just engage in that perversity and that's it. But to try to deify a faggot and then force the white faggot pseudo-deity on a black population in ancient Kamit, that was the first time that was done. And it has ramifications to right now, because this is what these crackers are doing now in their pseudo-spirituality. Talking about chakras, talking about, Odu, Ifa, and so forth, and trying to include homosexuality in the Yoruba tradition, Vodun, and everything else. But we're crushing all of that and all of them and their prophets, because they're all our enemies. So let's get into some detailed information. And of course, if you're on the phone line, you have a question or a comment, hit the number 1. In the chat room, you must log in as a user in order to interact in the chat room. So first, we're going to pull up a document. If you look in one of the obelisks, so-called obelisks with Tekenu, by the time the whites and their offspring got to it, they began to reclaim the Tekenu as obelisk. One of the ones for the Emperor Hadrian, and we're going to pull it up real quick. We're going to read part of the inscription from this particular Tekken that was set up by the Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century AD in Kamit. And then we're going to get into some detail dealing with this true story. Now, it was set up, as we said, in the 2nd century. The pyramidion of it is uninscribed, and you can find this in different places. If you look up the Tekken or obelisk of Hadrian, you can find this information. On the north side, the Emperor Hadrian is offering a figure of the divinity, the female divinity Ma'at, to the deity Herakuti, and he is called Lord of Crowns, Hadrian, Caesar, or so-called Caesar. And his wife is on there, Sabina, has a little title, which of course is fake. The inscriptions on the south and east sides of the shaft make it clear that Hadrian ordered that Antinous was to be worshipped as this text says, as Egyptian god, and we may be sure that native Egyptian ceremonies were performed daily in the temple to secure everlasting life for Antinous. So on this Tekken or obelisk that he had set up for Antinous after he died in the river and so forth, as a young faggot male, trying to deify him as Osiris Antinous. So he says Antinous is called Ausar or Osiris. He is said to breathe the breath of life. They inscribe this on the Tekken. His soul to be like that of Ra. He, like Ausar or Osiris, is called the truth speaker, indicating that his soul was believed to have been weighed in the great scales and found to be a speaker of the truth, and so forth. And so this is what the text says. It says, he is known as a god in all the divine shrines of Kamit. A temple has been built for him, and he is worshipped as a god by the priests and libationers of the south and north. And they're talking about the cracker fake priests who had invaded the culture, and they were the Romans, the Greeks, and so forth. A city is named after him. They named a city after this fact. And the Admiti soldiers of the lords of the north, the so-called Greeks, come there. Camps are provided for them, and they make happy their life there. They will come from Greece, set up camp in Kamit, retreats and so forth, so they can worship this white faggot, this fake dead. A temple of this quote-unquote god is there called by the name of Osiris Antinous. It is built of beautiful stone and has sphinxes and many statues similar to those which the Greeks make. All the goddesses give to him the breath of life, and he breathes the air which makes him young again. That's all on the text of the Tekken of Antinous. Actual inscription documented showing that they were deifying a faggot, trying to force that on our people in our native country. So now let's get into some biographical information. You'll see even more how perverse they are. And this is the method that they used then. This is the exact same method that they are using today. This is nothing new. So they are the exact same people, the same perverse accordant spirits, trying to force the same program on our people over thousands of years. And when we recognize that, we recognize that they are spirits of disorder. We recognize that divine order is comprised of divine law or love and divine hate. And we have nothing but divine hate for every one of the whites and their offspring who exist, who ever existed, and whoever will exist without exception, men, women, babies, and the unborn, until we make them extinct. So, let's look at some biographical information to get some more details about how this came about. Antinous was born around 111, quote-unquote, AD, died around 130 AD. So around 20 years old by the time he died. A Byzantine Greek youth. Bithynia was born around Claudiopolis, which is in Turkey, a Roman province of Bithynia. He was likely introduced to the Emperor Hadrian around 123 AD. That means around the time he was around 12 years old, before he was taken to Italy for a higher, quote-unquote, education. And he became the, quote-unquote, favorite of Hadrian by 128, but even before that. So let's scroll down and get to some of the more biographical information. He was born to a Greek family in Claudiopolis in Bithynia. They believe around the years 110 or 112, around that time, probably 111. Various potential origins for the name and so forth, but then the life of Hadrian is where we get to, life with Hadrian is where we get to the detailed information. Hadrian spent much time during his regime touring his empire. He arrived in Claudiopolis in June 123 AD, encountered Antinous there. This is when they began to have their relationship. Antinous was their so-called relationship. He was around 12 years old. So this is what these faggots were doing. This is part of white culture. Raping boys at 12 years old, but of course these boys are white, and they are accepting of that because they are white perverts themselves. Every time you see an individual, they are a spirit who has returned. They are a returning ancestor or returning ancestor. These white boys are white perverts from previous lifetimes. They're the same faggots coming back, the same white Greeks, white Romans, returning through their family members to live once again in the world. This is their culture. This is who they are, spirits of disorder. So he was touring the empire. He met him around 123 when he was like 12, 13 years old, 14 years old. And then he continued to tour, but then he returned to Italy around 125. He settled in that area. And then over the next couple of years, Antinous became his favorite little faggot out of all the other faggots that he was dealing with. Now, he was married to somebody named Sabina. Hadrian, the Emperor Hadrian, was married to Sabina, but of course, that was just a political arrangement, openly declaring his attraction for young boys. And of course, as they say, pederasty had played an accepted societal role amongst Greece's leisured and citizen classes, with an older Erastus, aged between 20 and 40, undertaking a so-called sexual relationship with an Eromenos, aged between 12 and 18, and taking a key role in their education. So this is where they get the corruption of the term mentor from. Mentu Ra, of course, is divinity in Kamit, that's corrupted by the whites and their offspring into mentor, and of course, in their perverse philosophy and pseudo-cosmology and mythology and so forth, a mentor is not just somebody like the deity Mentu Ra, who trains the king in warfare and family life and so forth amongst the whites and their offspring. A mentor is someone who guides the young male, but he also rapes the young male, and they have a faggot relationship all along until the young male grows up. That's the purpose of the mentoring, is the faggot relationship. That's their nature. So this is what that's part of their culture. So it says that it is known, and look at the way they described it. This is the way they word these things, shows their mindset today, just like they had the same mindset back then. It says, it is known that Hadrian believed Antinous to be intelligent and wise, which might explain part of the attraction. And they're talking about a Roman emperor who was, quote unquote, attracted to a 12 or 13-year-old boy. And they're talking about it in terms like, well, he recognized him to be so wise, and this is probably the basis of his attraction, as though they're talking about a grown man being attracted to a grown woman who's wise and intelligent, and he's really attracted to that. They're talking about a male with a boy. This is the perverse mindset of even the authors of today, and this is right on Wikipedia. And you'll find this in different texts. This is the way the whites and offspring speak about these things. So, another factor, they say, was potentially a shared love of hunting, which was seen as a particularly manly pursuit in Roman culture. So they will associate manly pursuit, like hunting, with their faggot attraction, so-called attraction. It says, although none survive, it is known that Hadrian wrote both an autobiography and erotic poetry about his boy favorite. It is therefore likely that he wrote about Antinous. Early sources are explicit that the relationship between Hadrian and Antinous was sexual. During their relationship, there is no evidence that Antinous ever used his influence over Hadrian for personal or political gain. Again, we're talking about somebody 12, 13, 14 when they first meet. And the people writing this article here talking about, well, in this particular instance, he didn't use his relationship to get any political gain. And they're talking about a faggot boy, but they're talking about him as though he was a wife or queen mother or something, just showing you the mindset of these perverts. Now, we say that it says that rather in March 127, Hadrian, probably accompanied by Antinous, traveled through the Sabine area of Italy. From 127 to 129, the emperor was then afflicted with an illness that doctors were unable to explain. In 128, he laid the foundation for a temple of Venus and Rome in the city of Rome, these fake deities, during a ritual where he may have been accompanied by Antinous. From there, Hadrian went on a tour to the north, during which he was accompanied by Antinous. In late 128, Hadrian and Antinous landed in Corinth, proceeding to Athens, where they remained until May 129 AD, accompanied by Sabina and others. It was in Athens that they attended the annual celebrations of the great mysteries of Eleusis, the Eleusinian mystery, so-called mystery, where Hadrian was initiated into the position of Epoptes in the Telesterion. It is generally agreed, although not proven, that Antinous was also initiated at that time. The Eleusinian mysteries, fake little mysteries, initiations, modeled after the initiations into priesthood and priesthood in ancient Kamit. Of course, and we didn't have quote-unquote mysteries. It's a mystery to the whites and their offspring, but it wasn't a mystery to our people. So the whites and their offspring is a mystery because they can't communicate with the Aboson. They don't know what they're saying. They can't communicate with the Nanonoman Thermophilus, ancestral spirits who are spiritually cultivated. So it's a mystery to them. But they modeled their little fake religious practices after ours. Of course, they're not communicating with real divinities at all. But the key here is they get involved in their fake religious practices and their initiations into different forms of fake priesthoods and priestesshoods, associating alignment with quote-unquote deities with faggotry. This is trying to show divine favor on their perverse relationship. And of course, when you see the descendants of these white Greeks and white Romans and white Arabs and so forth, today trying to invade, for example, the Yoruba tradition, invade Vodun and so forth, and you see these white so-called Hispanics or white perverts walking around with trying to call themselves by Yoruba names and talking about the Orisha and so forth and having little ilays. No Orisha has ever communicated with a white Hispanic and never will. So the only spirits they can communicate is with their dead, perverse, beastly relatives and discarnate non-relatives. But they are introducing homosexuality, of course, whenever a cracker shows up, dissexuality, homosexuality shows up. So you type in Orisha or Yoruba religion or Ifa in Google, and the first thing you see is page after page after page of white people and dissexuality. They have blanketed the internet associating the name Yoruba or Orisha or Ifa with dissexuality and crackers. And that's, of course, deliberate. They are the same descendants of these white Greeks and Romans who have reincarnated through their blood circles. They were they were practicing dissexuality as part of their fake mysteries back then, and they're trying to reintroduce that today. Now, after that, they headed to Asia Minor, settled at Antioch in June 129. They were there for a year, visiting Syria, Arabia, and Judea. From there, Hadrian became increasingly critical of the Judean culture and so forth, so-called Jewish culture. He feared the opposition to Romanization and so forth. And of course, in our book, Kukutuntum, we prove that Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Muhammad, Jesus, Moses, Aaron, Solomon, Sheba, Menelik, all are fictional characters. So they're just talking about the conflict between the different fake religions of the time. From there, they headed to quote-unquote Egypt or Kamit, arriving in Alexandria in August 130 AD, so-called AD or CE. There they visited the sarcophagus of Alexander of Macedonia, misnomered Alexander the Great. Although welcomed with public praise and ceremony, some of Hadrian's appointments and actions angered the city's Hellenic social elite, who began to gossip about his sexual activities, including those with Antinous, not because they were against it, but they were simply against him trying to take control over certain areas of administration that they preferred to be in control of. Because he was a Roman emperor, even though he was controlling North Afuraitkaitnit, he resided in Southern Europe, and they wanted to still have some autonomy. The Greeks didn't really appreciate the fact that the Romans had taken control, because they wanted to be the sole controllers, the sole criminal controllers of Kamit. Now, soon after, and probably around September 130, Hadrian and Antinous traveled to west to Libya, where they had heard of a Morosian lion causing problems for the local people. They hunted down the lion. He had people writing stories about that and everything else, and myths about that, publicizing the event, created bronze medallions of it, getting historians to write about it, all of this kind of stuff. Now, in late September or early October of 130 CE, Hadrian and his entourage, among them Antinous, assembled at quote-unquote Heliopolis, which is the ancient city of Anu, the city of Aten, Atemet, Ra'ed, and so forth. They assembled there to set sail upstream as part of a flotilla along the Hapi River, the so-called Nile River. The retinue included officials, the prefect, army, and naval commanders, as well as literary and scholarly figures. Now, on their journey up the river of Hapi, the so-called Nile, they stopped at Hermopolis Magna, meaning Kemenu, the primary shrine to the divinity Tahuti. It was shortly after this, in October 130, around the time of the festival of Ausar, that Antinous fell into the river and died, probably from drowning. So they met at Anu, the sacred city of Ra, and Ra'ed, and Atem, and Atemet. Sailed up the river. On their journey, they stopped at the major shrine in Kemenu for Tahuti. Then they, shortly after that, around the time of the festival of Ausar, is when he fell into the river and died. So they go to the shrines of the ancient divinities, and then the divinities kill the faggot. Make sure the faggot falls in the river and dies. The favorite of the emperor died. Now, Hadrian publicly announced his death, with the gossip soon spreading throughout the empire that Antinous had been intentionally killed and so forth, and they had some little things about that. Now, we get to the deification of the cult. Hadrian was devastated by the death of the faggot, his faggot counterpart. The local priesthood immediately deified Antinous by identifying him with Osiris due to the manner of his death. In keeping with Egyptian customs, Antinous' body was probably embalmed and mummified by priests, a lengthy process which might explain why Hadrian remained in Egypt until the spring of 131. Remember, these are not ancient Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit priests and priestesses. These are white faggot Greeks who have taken on priestly titles, just like the white faggot Greek Ptolemies became rulers, and then later after them, the Romans took over and they began to call themselves pharaohs and so forth, dress like our people, build temples like our people, utilize the Medusa, the hieroglyphs like our people, try to take on the names like being beloved of Amen and beloved of Ptah, beloved of Tahuti and beloved of Ma'at and everything. Of course, none of those deities love or communicate with the whites and their offspring, but they were imitating everything that we did in dress, in speech, in language, in ritual practice on the outside. So they tried to call themselves priests and priestesses. When you look at their sarcophagi and so forth, they're imitating us. When you look at their dress, when you look in ancient Kemet during that time, and you see these white so-called priests and priestesses walking around calling themselves Egyptian priests and priestesses, this is what they're talking about. Again, as we said, their descendants and their reincarnation are these crackers trying to invade the Yoruba tradition, Vodun, and everything else. Of course, only brainwashed Negroes accept that real Yoruba temples, Ilays, as well as Abosom Fie Nakan tradition, Humfors and Vodun, do not accept the whites and their offspring at any time on any level. They can't even enter a temple, let alone be participating in any aspect of ancestral religion. We do not divine for the whites and their offspring. We do not do readings for them, rituals, anything. Anybody engaged in that process is either deliberately a fraud or by unconsciously a fraud. They have separated themselves from the Orisha because the Orisha will never divine for the whites and their offspring. The Abosom will never divine for the whites and their offspring. They never have and never will. If anybody is saying that they do divination for the whites and their offspring, and the Abosom speak, and the Orisha speak, and the Vodou speak for them, they are either liars deliberately, criminal types, or they are liars because they've engaged in a false practice, and they're not dealing with real deity, no matter how long they say they have been in the culture. Now, we get back to this portion. So, after the fake priests and priestesses, quote-unquote, deified him, began to identify him with, quote-unquote, the corruption of the real divinity, and we show the image of Ausar, the actual authentic divinity, and then the fake character, Osiris Antinous, in the image for the show that we've placed online. So, this is the key here. While there in October 130, Hadrian proclaimed Antinous to be a deity and announced that a city should be built on the site of his death in commemoration for him to be called Antinopolis, which is what they did. The deification of human beings was not uncommon in the classical world. However, the public and formal divinization of humans was reserved for the emperor and members of the imperial family. And of course, when they talk about deifying somebody, the whites and their offspring can't deify anybody. They're just imitators. But even amongst them, it was for the imperial family. Thus, Hadrian's decision to declare Antinous a god and create a formal cult devoted to him was highly unusual. And he did so without the permission of the Senate, of the Roman Senate, of the legislature. Although the cult of Antinous therefore had connections with the imperial cult, it remained separate and distinct. Next, Hadrian also identified a sky between the eagle and the zodiac to be Antinous, and came to associate the rosy lotus that grew on the banks of the Nile as being the flower of Antinous. Now, first, this is a faggot. Then they try to make the faggot a deity and try to associate him with Ausar, calling him Osiris Antinous. Then they establish a specific star, a constellation, and try to call that the Star of Antinous. Then they try to say it's a specific plant life that's associated, that's sacred to this faggot. They build a city called Antinopolis and build shrines and everything else. Now, scroll down a little bit and we're going to get into some of the other things that they did. Antinopolis. Antinous was understood differently by various worshippers. Some of them saw him as a quote-unquote deified human being, like a quote-unquote hero or heros, and some tried to associate him with a theos or a deity. The city of Antinopolis was erected on the site of Hadrian, the ancient site of Hadrian in ancient Kamit. All previous buildings were razed and replaced. Razed meaning burned down, R-A-Z-E-D, and replaced, with the exception of the temple of Ramesu II. So they go into Kamit in a sacred site where ancient structures are, and they destroy all of them so they can build a city, and a city for a faggot, a fake faggot deity. Hadrian also had political motives for the creation of Antinopolis, which was to be the first Hellenic city in the Middle Nile region, thus serving as a bastion of Greek culture within the Egyptian area. To encourage Egyptians to integrate with this imported Greek culture, he permitted Greeks and Egyptians in the city to marry and allowed the main deity of Hadrian, Bes, to continue to be worshipped in Antinopolis alongside the new primary deity, Osiris Antinous. He encouraged Greeks from elsewhere to settle in the new city, using various incentives to do so. The city was designed on a gridiron plan that was typical of Hellenic cities and embellished with columns and many statues of Antinous, as well as a temple devoted to this fake deity. He proclaimed that games would be held in the city in spring 131 in commemoration of Antinous, known as Antinoia. They would be held annually for several centuries. So just like you have Olympic Games and so forth, he established a certain kind of set of games for this fake deity, and they were celebrated and observed for centuries. This is the deification of dissexuality of a faggot by the whites and their offspring. They were being noted as the most important. Events included athletic competitions, chariot and equestrian races, and artistic and musical festivals with prizes, including citizenship, money, tokens, and free lifetime maintenance. Antinopolis continued to grow into the Byzantine era, being Christianized with the conversion of the empire. However, it retained an association with magic, quote-unquote magic, for centuries to come. Over the centuries, stone from the Hadrianic city was removed for the construction of homes and mosques. By the 18th century, the ruins of Antinopolis were still visible, being recorded by such European travelers as the Jesuit missionary Sigard in 1715 and Jomars the Surveyor circa 1800. In the 19th century, Antinopolis was almost completely destroyed by a local industrial production, as the chalk and limestone was burned for powder while stone was used in the construction of a nearby dam and sugar factory. So for nearly 1900 years, this city, now the spread of the cult, which is important as well because that comes all the way up to today. Hadrian was keen to disseminate the cult of Antinous throughout the Roman Empire. He focused on its spread within Greek lands. In the summer of 131, traveled these areas, promoting it by presenting Antinous in a syncretized form with the more familiar deity Hermes. Of course, Hermes is the corruption of the divinity Tahuti. So now he was already fused with the corruption of Ausar, calling him Osiris Antinous, which of course Ausar never dealt with this faggot. Then they try to fuse him with the divinity of divine wisdom. Of course, that sounds very familiar because these faggots today are trying to say that faggotry is connected to gatekeepers and divine wisdom and going between both worlds, which is nonsense. But this goes back all the way a couple of thousand years ago, nearly a couple of thousand years ago. So he talks about on a visit to Trapezus in 131, he proclaimed the foundation of a temple devoted to Hermes, where the deity was probably venerated as Hermes Antinous. Although he preferred to associate Antinous with Hermes, he was far more widely syncretized with the god Dionysus across the empire. And of course, Dionysus in Europe is quote-unquote Osiris or Ausar from ancient Kamit. The Antinous cult spread through Egypt amongst the whites and offspring who were controlling it, and within a few years of its foundation, altars and temples to the fake deity had been erected in Hermopolis, Alexandria, Oxyrhynchus, Tibetanus, Lycopolis, and Apet Reset or Luxor. Cult of Antinous was never as large as those of well-established deities such as Zeus or Dionysus, Demeter, or Asclepius, and so forth, or such as Isis and Serapis. It was also smaller than the official imperial cult of Hadrian himself. However, it was able to spread throughout the empire, with traces of the cult having been found in at least 70 cities, although its strength was far greater in certain regions than others. Now, at least 28 temples were constructed for the worship of Antinous throughout the empire. That's one key. They were given votive offerings. The worshippers would have given votive offerings to this fake deity at these altars. There's evidence that he was giving gifts of food and drink in Egypt, with libations and sacrifices probably being common in Greece. Priests devoted to Antinous, of course, white faggot fake priests devoted to Antinous, would have overseen this worship the names of some of these individuals having survived in the inscription. There's evidence of oracles being present at a number of Antonine temples. So you have some faggots, just like today's little faggots, talking about they can do divination and do readings for you and so forth. Who are they communicating with? The same kind of perverse spirits that they are. So, and that's all they can communicate with. No faggot can communicate with the divinity, even if they're black. The forces in nature do not communicate with dissexual homosexuals. The ancestresses and ancestors who are spiritually cultivated do not communicate with people who are dissexual homosexuals. The only people they communicate with, spirits that these dissexual homosexuals can communicate with, discarnate, are perverse spirits of disorder just like them. So anybody with a little altar talking about these are my ancestors and they're faggots, the deities and ancestral spirits are not communicating with them. They never have and they never will without exception. Now, sculptures were widespread. They found around 2,000 sculptures made for the fake deity. About 115 of them survived. They're in Italy and all over the place, Greece, Asia Minor, and even in Kamit. Over 31 cities in the empire, the majority of Greece and Asia Minor, issued coins depicting Antinous. Everything dealing with the normal divinity, they added to this fake faggot deity for deification. And they also have the coins, place holes in the coins to make them, useful as talismans and so forth. And then they talk about the decline of the culture, the decline of the cult, and so forth. However, the cult has risen back up because you can look online and they have little faggot temples to Osiris Antinous today. Little white faggots reestablishing the quote-unquote Osiris Antinous cult and talking about he's the god of all gays, and they have little fake priests and priestesses to Antinous and all this other nonsense. So they're the exact same people who were engaged in that process a couple of thousand years ago, and they're the exact same faggot spirits of disorder who have returned to engage in that same perversity to this day. Now, we want to, if you have a question or a comment in the chat room, you can hit the number 1. Or, I'm sorry, on the phone line, you can hit the number 1. We're going to go through the chat room real quick, make sure we did not miss anything in the chat room. I saw a couple of comments in the chat room. Okay, and then there's a question, where does the quote-unquote teaching that ancient Egyptians allowed Greeks, Romans, etc., into their temples to be taught come from? I've heard variations of this from different scholars. So you'll find that in the text of Kamit, you'll find that Greeks and Asiatics and the unwashed and those who were insane and those who were bearded were not allowed to even go into the temples, let alone be taught. So this whole notion of we taught the Greeks and so forth, that's not part of our ancestral culture. The only time something like that would happen is later on when our people were already controlled by the whites and their offspring. We were not sitting around having classes with the Greeks and Romans and teaching them our culture. They were invaders from the very beginning. So now you can have some compromised Negro types, which we have compromised Negroes today. They are incarnations and reincarnations and descendants from those compromised Negroes back then. But it was not part of the policy of our culture back then to teach them anything, especially with regard to ancestral religious practice, just like it is not now. The deities do not communicate with the whites and their offspring. They never have and never will. So we couldn't teach them the culture because they were never communicating with them in the first place. So anybody who's saying they're teaching the whites and their offspring about the religion and practice and so forth, they were going against the deities, and the deities have nothing to do with that. So that was never part of the policy. Okay. I want to make sure we didn't miss anything. And some of that information as far as the tekken and specific text, the declaration, of becoming a god and so forth, we were reading from the obelisk of Hadrian. So you can get that in Cleopatra's Needles, or you can just Google the obelisk of the Emperor Hadrian, and you see those inscriptions on the different parts of the obelisk, talking about, Ma'at being offered to the divinity and him being called a divinity and all this other stuff, and how the goddesses are giving him the breath of life, all that stuff from the obelisk of the Emperor Hadrian. And then biographical information, we were looking at the Wikipedia site, but then you'll find all over the internet, you type in Osiris Antinous, and you'll find, the various references and publications that have been written about him going back nearly 2,000 years. You'll find the, original accounts, eyewitness accounts, and everything else talking about this fact. Okay. And when black men and women get into relations with whites, could this be considered to be dissexuality? Absolutely. In fact, we mentioned that when we did a broadcast, actually the Ma'al Keru webcast. On our Ma'al Keru page, we talked about morality and the insanity of dissexuality. Homosexuality is defined in Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit ancestral religion. We talk about sexual deviance. So dissexuality, real sexuality, is not occurring unless you have the Afurakani man, Afuraitkaitnit woman. Not man and man, not woman and woman, not man and child. No sexual deviance. The only time you have sexuality taking place is an Afurakani man and Afuraitkaitnit woman, not some other race. Then you're not engaged in real sexuality. Sexuality is the union of the Afurakani man, Afuraitkaitnit woman, because we are governed by the abosom forces in nature. This is a harmonious union. Anything else is perverse. Anything else is sexually deviant. So interracial relationships is no different than homosexual, dissexual relationships. Anytime we step outside of divine order, we are sexually deviant. That also goes for, as we mentioned in the webcast, anybody brutalizing, engaged in domestic violence and so forth, attacking one another, man, Afurakani male beating on a Afuraitkaitnit woman, or an Afuraitkaitnit woman trying to beat on an Afurakani male, whatever it is, that's a manifestation of us following the whites and their offspring. When you're attacking your quote-unquote mate, whether it's verbal or whether it's physical, when you're attacking them, that's, if you're a male and you're attacking a woman, you're anti-woman. You're showing hatred for the woman, meaning you're a faggot, because else you wouldn't be attacking them. You don't attack things that you actually are in law with or quote-unquote in love with. If you have that kind of hostility, it has nothing to do with someone pushing your buttons. That's nonsense. You're a faggot. You're engaged in hating women. You're all that hostility and fire being directed towards them. It's the same thing with a female trying to attack a male, whether it's verbally or physically, as some might try to do. That's anti-man. That's lesbian. That's faggotry. That's perversity. That's type behavior. That's sexual deviance. So whether it's child molestation, whether it's physical abuse or verbal abuse or whatever it is, or interracial, so-called interracial coupling or miscegenation, all of those are forms of sexual deviance, and they are all in reality dissexual. The only time you have real sexuality occurring is with the Afurakani man and the Afuraitkaitnit woman, full-grown male and female. All right. Going to scroll back through. We see we have a call on the phone line. Michelle on the phone line. You had a question or a comment?
Yes, Michelle. Let me take my headphones off. I know that sometimes interfere. Just one moment.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Pardon me. Thank you. Thank you for taking the call. Thank you for this topic also. And I've commented before that I just so appreciate your, uncompromising stand on this question in particular. So I wanted to make sure that I reiterated that statement. There's so many people out there that are trying to deflect and say, "Oh, we have so many more important things to worry about," and "Oh, this is just a wedge issue," and it's taken away from the real things we need to worry about. And, I've always felt that this is the real thing we need to worry about. This is, the very attack on the last thing that we have left, and we barely have that left, which is our families. So thank you again for not compromising and just remaining strong and unmoved on this question about dissexuality. But since you brought up this ancient Roman person, I kind of want to parlay that to a question that I have about an article that I came across today. I actually found it a little amusing that white supremacists are now turning to their, for lack of better terms, ancient European pagan religions and thinking that they can call on their deities, in the war against black people and the world of color. They're starting to embrace this Odin, Nordic god, and the so-called god, and the ancient Nordic deities, and they're talking about doing animal sacrifices, and they're thinking that they can actually get some power, from animal sacrifices. And they're kind of, I really do believe that it's a response to the increased interest among African people in their ancient ancestral traditions. And they're saying, African people are starting to reject Judaism, the Judeo-Christian line in favor of their own religion that's closer to them culturally. And these whites are now basically saying the same thing. We're rejecting Christianity and we're going back to our pagan deities because we get more power from them. And, they say, oh, no blacks are allowed in our religion because we're saying no whites are allowed in ours. And I just think it's a little comical. But I just wondered if you have any insight on this particular movement of whites, to try to embrace what they think is their ancient deities, if there is such a thing as a white ancient deity.
Oh, yeah. In fact, that's the whole quote-unquote New Age movement and all of that. Now, of course, the whites and offspring know that they don't have any deity. All they're doing is going back to exactly what their relatives were doing, Greece and Rome, and prior to that, they first came in contact with us. They learned about religion. They came to corrupt that process because they can't communicate with deities. They start repainting deities white and everything else. And this is where you get these fake Nordic deities, or in the East with Hinduism, or Buddhism, or in the Southern Europe and into North Afuraitkaitnit with the Greeks and Romans and so forth, or in Western Asia. And then later on with Christianity and Islam and Judaism and so forth. But they're just doing the exact same thing they've been doing for thousands of years, trying to corrupt the tradition. It is true that the reason why they're moving in that direction is because they see our people leaving Christianity and the fake religion in droves. So the first thing they want to do to stop the religion is to try to invade the Afuraitkaitnit ancestral religion, which is, the Yoruba tradition, or they're trying to create little Kamit temples and the Sekhmet temple and all these other nonsensical organizations trying to talk about their embracing that or including into wicked nonsense and trying to get our people involved and make us, engaged in some integration and all this kind of foolishness, and they're still giving black people the nigger treatment even in their fake little pseudo-religious practice. So part of it is to invade our tradition, but there are a lot of our people who are focused and have nothing but divine hate for all of these crackers, no matter whether they are alive or yet to be born. So then they have to retreat. Some of them have to retreat and start trying to go back, quote unquote, back to their original practices, which there's no such thing as an indigenous European religion. All it is them imitating what our people were doing, deliberately manufacturing fake deities, trying to pretend like they have a culture so that they can try to use that to try to dominate our people, or try to get our people to respect them or embrace them or to, align with them or join them, and they will still try to dominate our people. So no matter what they're doing, no matter what manifestation of pseudo-religion they express, it's always for the same purpose, to try to figure out a way to keep us off base and try to, dominate our people in some way, some form, some shape, some fashion.
Yeah, I thought that maybe these so-called deities were corrupted, and misappropriated versions of, ancient African deities that they've assigned, European names to. They tried to equate, Thor with Shango, and I think they try to equate, Venus with Oshun, because of the characteristics of those deities.
Right. So that, for example, like you said, the same, 7-day week, which they learned from our people. So they have Freya, which is Friday, which is the goddess of planet Venus. That's, of course, Afi, which is the divinity Afi, a title of Heteru. Of course, that's Oshun. And Thor with the hammer is nothing more than Yao with the axe, divine axe from ancient Kamit, and the double axe, Shango. In the Yoruba tradition, you see Shango with the double axe. That's Thor on Thor's Day or Thursday, which is Yao-Da, which is the divinity Yao with Heru. And you have, the divinity Tu, who's connected to Mars and fire and war. You call it Heru Desher in ancient Kamit, or the red horse by the time they get to, the Romans and Mars and so forth. So each one of the so-called deities of the days of the week is stolen directly from our culture. They rename them a little bit, so sometimes they leave the same similar name, same attributes, but then they whiten them up. And then, of course, they can't communicate with the real divinity, so all they have is little images of white entities, and they're calling them deities, acting like they're invoking them.
Yeah. So, since you mentioned, this Roman emperor trying to deify, his homosexual partner, I thought I'd take the opportunity to ask you your thinking on this recent trend toward, embracing the Nordic so-called deities. Right.
Yeah. So that's just the same, another iteration of what they always do, trying to figure out a way to legitimize themselves in the eyes of our people, and then we start trying to follow them or embrace them, or some kind of way make us have some reverence for them, so we won't see them for who they really are, our absolute enemy. So that's all they're on.
Now, if they do, is it possible that there are some of those Europeans who can tap into the discarnate spirits, and if they're really intent on a race war, and they tap into these, savage, the savage ancestors that they have, is it possible that there could be some damage done if they're?
Well, they're always in communication with their criminal deceased relatives. They've been in, no matter, they can play around and do little rituals and dress up with little Viking helmets and all that if they want to, you know what I'm saying? And create little temples and all of that, and put on little fur pelt if they want, you know what I'm saying? And dress up like Conan, the barbarian or whatever. But whether they do that or not, if they're just living in Alabama and going to church, they're still communicating with their same dead grandparents, who are just as criminal as the ones were in Europe. There's no difference.
Right.
It's not like the ones in Europe were more savage or whatever. They're the same practice, continuously coming back. So whether they do it in an outward, aesthetic of ancient European religion, with there's no such thing, or if they just continue to do what they're doing now, they're still engaged in the same process.
Okay, so there's, slitting the throat of a sheep or an animal as a form of ebo, or not ebo, but sacrifice, is not going to release any different, discarnate spirit than, say, if they were to just cold-blooded, murder a black man on the street. It still releases the same kind of discarnate energy that they're already tapped into, if I'm understanding.
Right, because they don't have, outside of their deceased relatives and some non-relatives, they don't have anybody else to connect with. Because the Abosom will never connect. Of course, our spiritually cultivated ancestors will never connect with them, so they only have access to their own deceased relatives. And then some discarnate perverse, some of our people became so perverse that they separated from us and they lost their own crop. They'll have access to some degenerate, crackhead type, homeless type spirits as well. But outside of that, nothing they do can make them connect with anybody, beyond their frequency.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for indulging my question about that, and again, thank you for your steadfast stance on this particular topic tonight, and keep it up. We really appreciate you, and we need your voice.
Okay, Medase, we appreciate that. We appreciate the call.
Medase.
So we have a couple of comments in the chat room while we were on the phone line. Just want to make sure we get to that. All right. So there was one comment saying, I've been suspicious for a while regarding the true age of this Christianity practice. I feel its true beginning is in the 1200s and not 2,000 years ago. And this story serves as a reminder that our religion was still the order of the day back then. You'll even find, even going up to, Antinous dying in the so-called 2nd century AD, even going up to the plague of Justinian, around 542 so-called AD, after sends out the edict to close the last temple of Ausar in southern Kamit. Then after that period, then they get hit with the plague of Justinian, and it wipes out millions of Europeans, and then they fall into a dark ages for the next 500 years. Why did he have to send out a decree to close the last temple of Ausar in the 540s AD? Because our people were still worshiping Ausar openly in ancient Kamit, going to the temple and so forth, and it was very popular, and he had to try to figure out a way to shut it down. And then he ended up getting shut down and so forth. So, yes, definitely. When they talk about the way the whites and their offspring talk about Christianity, and of course Negroes who jump on, they try to make it seem like as soon as somebody enunciated the word Christianity, it just took over instantaneously. Yes, there were Nicene councils and so forth, like the Council of Nicaea in 325 so-called AD, but then you had the Council of Ephesus and Chalcedon and everything else going all the way up into the 1200s. These councils were continuous, and the vast majority of our people had nothing to do with Christianity. The vast majority of our people had nothing to do with Christianity in reality until around the late so-called 1800s and into the early 1900s. It's not that we were not introduced to it. The Akan people were introduced to it in the so-called 1400s. We just didn't we knew it was there. We didn't want to have nothing to do with it because we knew it was stupid. So our people didn't get involved into the late 1880s, 1890s, and into the early 1900s after having been exposed to it for hundreds of years but had nothing to do with it. So the vast majority of our people never embraced that nonsense. So it didn't just happen overnight. It took them centuries, over 1,000 years, to get people to start trying to force people onto that, and the vast majority of the world had nothing to do with it. So, and the same thing with Islam. The vast majority of our people, even when they show a big swath of North Afuraitkaitnit, and they say this whole region was dominated by Islam and, the 8th century and all that, they're just painting, colors over a map. The vast majority of those people had nothing to do with Islam. You had a couple of leaders and a couple of people in certain positions who would take on little titles and so forth because they're trying to trade with the white Arabs and so forth. But the people, day in and day out in the culture, they were still communicating with their ancestors and doing their thing. It took them hundreds of years as well before some of our people started latching on to that nonsense. It didn't just happen overnight either. Okay, so you also said, I also suspect that the legalization of child sexuality is next on the agenda, beginning with the intent to relax on child labor laws now in discussion. And of course, so that's been part of their culture. It's always been part of their culture. They're always trying to find a way to slide it in. So when they have little children, beauty pageants and everything, and the little girls are dressed up, looking like grown women, and they're like 8 years old, and people are clapping and everything, that's all child molestation type stuff. When the Jewish rabbis put their mouths on the genitals of the newborns and everything and suck the blood off of them and everything, basically performing oral dissexuality, that's the introduction of the white Jewish baby to the world, is the male putting the mouth on the organ. That's their nature. All of the whites in our offspring, white Asians, white Europeans, white Hindus, white Arabs, white pseudo Native Americans, white Hispanics, white Latinos, and so forth, that is their nature as spirits of disorder. That's how they came into being perverse like that, sexual deviant. So, yes, it's a steady march. Of course, the first thing is, trying to, putting forth the whole faggot marriage being legal and trying to get people to accept that and be tolerant and everything else, trying to dumb down ancestral religion, trying to dumb down nationalism, where these Negroes are starting to say, well, it's okay to be a faggot as long as you're fighting for people. We need all of our people to fight against the enemy. Absolutely not. We don't need all of our people. We've never needed all of the people to fight against the whites in our offspring. That's not even something you need to focus on. All of the cells in your body don't fight against the toxins. 1 out of 14, the immune system cells, the lymphatic system cells, they have that job. All the other systems don't have that job. And you don't need to have every system in the body. You don't need the digestive system or the, excretory system killing cancerous cells. You let the immune system do their job, the lymphatic system do its job. So we don't need all of our people, number one. Those who are designed to wage war, and everybody else can simply support. That's number one. Number two, people engaged in dissexuality, homosexuality are not part of the community. They're part of the enemy. They become nothing more than the KKK. And they're deliberately involved in that perversity, and they're going to continue with that. We don't need them. They are no different than any other enemy in the community. They're no longer part of our community. We treat them the exact same way as we treat the KKK. That's who they are. So we don't need nor want them as part of our community because they are not that. So we need to understand it. All right. So, yes, so they're promoting that perversity. That's their nature. There's another question. And you said, I heard that you said in the past that the whites know that they are rejected by the divine, born in sin, as they put it. Is that why they have studied us so intently? It seems that they know more about us than we do. But that's, they know that they're spirits of disorder. They despise the fact that they are and we are not. They're always seeking a way to try to make sure we don't find out and begin to operate based on who we are, because that means the end of, number one, their rule or control over us. Number two, it means the end of them as a group, because they will be exterminated. So they're always on the lookout to try to make sure that doesn't happen, try to stave off that inevitability. Do you ever suspect that what books that were not destroyed has been hidden within their keep? Our books, of course, whether people talk about a lot of the Medusa, the hieroglyphic texts and so forth in the Vatican or different places, of course, there are many things the white offspring will never release. They're not just going to, everything that they excavate, they're not going to give it up, especially when it's, certain things that would directly prove that, Christianity is fake and everything else. Of course, they will hide those things, but we have enough that still exists out in the open to prove that. And of course, we prove that in the Kukulkan. But of course, they will, have kept many things. But it doesn't matter, because our culture is not based on text. That's just a small expression of the culture. You don't write down, even though it's a very, quote-unquote, literate society, you don't write down 99.999% of everything you do throughout the course of the day or everything you think. You couldn't. Our culture is not based on text. That's fake religion is based on text, like Christianity and Islam and Judaism and everything else, Hinduism with its, Bhagavad Gita and the Dhammapadas and Buddhism and all of that other nonsense. Our culture is direct experience with the abosum, the forces of nature. When you can communicate directly with them, you can always be rejuvenated, replenished, reminded of what the culture is. But when you don't have that connection, you can learn from the Nsamako as well, the ancestors and ancestors. When you do not have that connection, you have to have something written down so you can memorize it, because it was never your culture in the beginning. You have to memorize something and repeat it and try to teach it to people, because if you don't have it written, you can't have any experience. But we can constantly have experience. So anything we forget, we can go directly to the ancestors and ancestors who founded those practices and who engaged them over centuries, and they can remind us exactly what we were doing back then and what we need to be doing right now. So we're not dependent on text at all, whatsoever. They're just an additional expression of the culture. All right, so I'm going to make sure you didn't miss anything else in the chat room. And just give us a second. In the meantime, we have another call on the phone line.
Yeah, I'd like to
on the phone line. Number 6509, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, Lafias. I'd like to get your idea on any validity on that Queen of Sheba thing they be talking about.
No, say again. You said.
I'd like to get your. Excuse me?
You said the Queen of Sheba and Menelik?
Yeah, what's your take on that?
Okay, so now we address them in one of our publications, the Kukutuntun, the Ancestral Jurisdiction. So, of course, Solomon and Sheba and Menelik, as well as David, are all fictional cartoon characters who never existed at all. There was no Black Solomon. There was no Black Queen of Sheba. There was no son of Solomon Sheba named Menelik, and of course there was no David. So when you look at the quote-unquote Queen of the South who goes to the king in the north, the king of Israel, and then when she returns to the south, she has Menelik, the son of the wise one, and all of that. That whole story is talking about Ausar, Aset, and Heru as they operate through the star system Sa, which the white and offspring call Orion, which is the abode of Ausar in the stellar realm. Sapatit, which is the title of the star system Sirius, or Sophis, called by the white and offspring. We call it Sapat or Sapatit, and Aset operates that star. And then when she gives birth to Heru, Heru in Sapatit, or Heru in Sapat, he's the Heru in that star system. So Sapat means the provider, and Aset, Sapatit, is Aset, the queen of that star system. She is the queen of Sapat. And this is where you get the queen of Saba, or the queen of Shaba, and the queen of Sheba. When you look at that star system, every year at the same time of the year, that particular star Sapat, moves towards the star Sa, or quote-unquote Orion, and they unite. Ausar and Aset unite in the sky. And then the star begins day after day after day, starts to separate, and the star Sapatit goes back to her abode. So when they talk about the queen of the south going up to meet the king in the north in Israel, and then when she returns from the king in the north, she's pregnant with Menelik, that happens every year in the sky, the union of Ausar and Aset in the sky. One of the titles of Aset operating through the star system is Reki, and Reki means the wise one. So she's called Aset Reki. Aset, the wise queen mother. Of course, she's the divine healeress. She assisted in the resurrection of Ausar and everything else. And she's the great one of, quote unquote, spiritual power, or quote unquote, magic and everything else. She's a great, great wise queen mother. She's a Reki. Now, Heru, when he's born of Aset, he's called the son of Reki. One of the titles for posterity, or those who come after, is Per or Pera. So Pera Reki is the son or offspring, peta, or of the wise queen, Rekit. Now, in ancient Kamit, there was no letter L. There was a rolling R. And when the whites and offspring come in with their foreign languages, when they have letter L, we would translate in the Medusa their letter L, where we use the symbol for the rolling R, symbol for the R in the Medusa. The same thing in our Akan language. There's no letter L in Akan. There's a rolling R. Like you say mulatto, that's a foreign word. Akan people don't say mulatto, they say murato with a rolling R because we don't have a letter L. Same thing in Kamit. So, with the whites and offspring pronouncing and mispronouncing our language, the title of Offset is Offset Lekit. It's really Rekit, the wise one. Offset Rekit operating through the star system Sapatit or Sapat. She's the queen of Sapat. The queen of Sapat is the queen of Saba or queen of Shaba or later Sheba. At the same time, she's Rekit, with the wife and offspring would say Lekit. And then Lekit, of course, means wise one, a corruption of our term. It means that when you look in the Keber and the Gas, and they say that the name Menelik is really Bena Lekim. Bena Lekim means Bena, the son or offspring of, Lekim, the wise one. Bena Lekim became Menalekim and Menelek and Menelek. That's Pera Rekit, the son or offspring, Pera of Rekit, the wise queen. Pera Rekit is the title of Peru. When he's operating through the star system, he's the son of Offset. He's Pera Rekit, which was corrupted into Benalekim, or Menalekim, Menelek, and so forth. So that whole story is totally stolen from the movement of Offset connecting with Ausar. When that star system goes back towards the south, she is pregnant with Heru. When he's born, and once he's born, he's the son of the wise one, and he becomes the king in place, in the rulership of Ausar. So we go into detail about that in our book, Kukutuntun, The Ancestral Jurisdiction.
So you say there is no validity to even Menelik II then?
You said the what?
Then there's no, Menelik II, the guy they call Menelik II, there's no validity to that either.
No, the only problem with him, of course, he was he lived 100 years ago, and he led, a coalition against the Italians and so forth, and the Battle of Ottawa and all of that. The only problem is he shouldn't be calling himself Menelik II because there was never a Menelik I. That's the only problem. He took on a name that had nothing to do with his people at all because they had embraced Christianity like 1,600 years ago, some of their people in leadership, and then later on the other people embraced it. Prior to that, they were practicing their own traditional ancestral religion. And some of the people still practice their own ancestral religion in Ethiopia, Eritrea, Tigrinya people, and so forth. And a lot of them are brainwashing the Christianity and Islam and forms of, Judaism. So because they embraced that nonsense, they started trying to link themselves up with fictional characters and name themselves after fictional characters. So he should have just taken on one of his, traditional ancestral names, just like some of our people. We get involved with Islam, and then we change our name to Muhammad, which is ridiculous. So we get involved with Christianity and give ourselves names like Michael and everything else. So we get involved with Judaism, so-called Hebrewism, and then all of a sudden people walking around named Yahshua and everything else. And of course, none of these characters exist. So that's the only problem with regard to that name. He named himself after a fiction. It's no different than if he decided to call himself Santa Claus II, that would be ridiculous because there was never a Santa Claus I. Mm-hmm. And he did the same.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Mira. Okay. So we want to make sure we didn't miss anything in the chat room. Want to make sure we didn't miss anything. We saw a couple of comments. And, okay. Okay, so there's a few minutes left in the broadcast, so we just want to say, for the people who came in a little bit later, this weekend on Sunday, Sunday, November 22nd, we will be in Decatur, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta, doing a presentation on Hoodoo, the Arcana ancestral religion born of the blood circles of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in North America. So we're going to be dealing with that topic in detail, showing the connections from ancient Kamit, Nubia, all the way to West Afuraitkaitnit, all the way into the Western Hemisphere. We're going to talk about our book, Hoodoo People. We endeavor to give away a free copy of that book to everyone who attends the event, like we do at all of our events. If you would like to support the work that we are doing, we are trying to get those books printed out and get the rest of the material so we can print out as many as possible, as soon as possible, because we have to get them ready, get the orders for the ink and all of that. So if you'd like to support that work and assist us in that process for this free event that will be happening in Decatur, Georgia, any purchase of our books, softcover books, which range between $8 and $11. We have 17 books that we have published to date. We have more coming out, by the way, very soon. You can go to our Homa page, our publications page. You can go now, because that will assist us. We can place some orders early tomorrow morning, so that we can, rush that ink out and we can get as many of these books published, including the Coco Bo book, proving that dissexuality, homosexuality was never accepted in ancient Kamit, going through those ancient texts, proving that in detail. And that's part of, our Coco Bo movement. So giving those books out for free as well, so we can combat this foolishness, this dissexual agenda that the whites and their offspring are trying to force on our people. It's one thing for us to rail against it. It's another thing to have actual detailed information from our direct blood circle ancestral culture from ancient times to now, proving that we have never accepted that, proving that to our people, proving that to ourselves, of course, our children. And, we have a backstop against all of this nonsense that the whites and offspring are trying to promote, and all these perverted people in our community who are proxies for the whites and offspring, trying to promote this idea that African culture was all about accepting dissexuality. We hate dissexuality and repulse that nonsense. So we're giving away those books whenever we can. So again, any purchase, even a donation, any donation of $15 or more, gives you the option of receiving one or more of our books in return for your donation. So it's not just a free donation. So that will assist us in this process, and we're trying to get that done quickly. So Yedase, we thank you for tuning in, and for the people who have already donated or made some purchases in the past. That allowed us to give away the free books a couple of days ago here in D.C., as well as the free books a couple of weeks ago in Alabama. And we have more events that we're preparing for. We're going to do something else in D.C. in December, as well as Philly in December, and Atlanta this coming weekend. We have some other things coming up, potentially, tentatively, in North Carolina and possibly Florida and Louisiana. We're going to get some things together, so keep checking out the website for those updates. If you would like for us to come to your city, simply email us. Go to the website, the ODWIRA.com website. Go to the Contact Us section, email us, and we can work those things out. So, Yedase, we thank you for tuning in to the broadcast, and Yebeshiabio, we will meet again. What's up?